Since January, we've been talking about the many facets of making choices. For the next month or so, we're going to focus on intellectual choices, the things we choose to believe about the nature of God, human beings, the world we live in and on, what we label as moral or immoral, and all the rest of it. While I don't believe that God is going to judge us based on what we think, or give us a theology quiz at the pearly gates, our beliefs end up manifesting in how we behave on this earth. And God cares very much about that. So as long as we are still here in the flesh, God does care about what we think, who we believe God to be, and how we view ourselves and our human and non-human neighbors, because it affects our behavior. The Bible actually charts that connection out pretty well in both Testaments. What we actually believe ends up coming out of our mouths in those infamous hot mic moments, whether we're at a mic or not. And once something is spoken out into the world, action based on that is typically not far behind. When those professing Christian faith do atrocious things, which has been happening regularly for millennia, sometimes those bad actors are just opportunists, and they're pretending to be Christian because it's politically convenient or something else. But I think more frequently, harmful actions by Christians spring from bad theology. What a person believes about the nature of God, human beings, the broader world, and the relationships between them goes off the rails somewhere and results in behavior that the person truly believes is righteous, but that bears no resemblance at all to what Jesus taught or how he lived. And I know that because I have been a very sincere Christian my entire life. And sometimes I have been very sincerely wrong. So this is the voice of experience speaking. And this kind of a topic can go off in a lot of different directions. But since what I see as bad theology is already shaping laws and life in this country, and is poised to gain even more power if we let it, I'm going to take the opportunity to do a series that I have wanted to do since seminary. And that is to take a look at the biggest theological disputes across Christian history. I've always wanted to look at heretics I have known and loved. But we're not going to look at ideas that only at ideas that got labeled as heresies by the church. We'll look at those, but we'll also look at theological ideas that have split the church. Things that once got people burned at the stake that now are just perfectly fine everywhere, like translating the Bible into a language people can read, for example. And we'll look at the debates about the fundamental nature of God and life that still rage today. I do not intend to focus on debates about particular social issues, except to point out that many of the specific issues that divide us can't really be solved on the surface, because the issue is usually not about what we're fighting about on the surface. The real issue is underneath that. And for people of faith, it often relates to our theology, which is just talk about God, the ways that who we believe God to be, what we believe about the nature of human beings. So we've got to go underneath that. Going deeper doesn't mean we can eliminate the conflict, but at least when we debate it, we're debating about something that really exists instead of the issue that has made it manifest on the surface. I'm also going to focus on the kinds of beliefs that affect our ability to live lives of love and justice. There are all kinds of beliefs about matters of faith and religion, and many of them are ideas worth considering. But in this series, we're not going to focus on whether it's okay to sing Christmas carols during Advent, whether pulpits should be in the center of the chancel or off to the side, or how frequently we perform the liturgy of Holy Communion. We're going to look at the really, really big stuff. Are human beings at our core good, evil, some combination of those two things? Were we good once and then the fall messed it all up? Are we truly free to choose our actions? Or has all of that been predetermined and we're just following a script? Does everything happen for a reason? And does that reason have anything at all to do with God? How much power does sin have in our lives? Can law and grace, justice and mercy coexist? What is the nature of God? And the purpose of all this is not to raise a big question and then have me pontificate about a definitive answer. Every time the church has done that throughout history, it has ended badly. And if we continue to do that today, it will end badly yet again. The purpose is to recognize that there are not single issues to those questions, single answers to those questions, even within Christian faith. Many of them are the reason that different Christian denominations exist. What unites Christians is a who, not a what. When one particular brand of theology gets a lot of public exposure, it is so easy in a largely unchurched society for people to assume that that's what every single Christian believes, especially when the public voice is saying, this is what you have to believe to call yourself Christian. And that's simply not true. Even within the same denomination, even within the same congregation, and I'm betting even within the same family. Further, just like every species needs genetic diversity to keep from sliding into birth defects, disease, and decline, I think theological diversity is actually a healthy and necessary thing for every religion, and every religion has it. There is no one thing that all Muslims believe. There is no one thing that all Jews believe. There is no one thing that all Hindus believe. Every major religion has a whole spectrum of different and sometimes opposing beliefs sitting within it. Christianity is not different. Further, the trick is how to talk about our own bedrock beliefs about the nature of God, ourselves, and the world with curiosity, with care, and with respect for those who have built their own foundation on something totally different. I don't mean to say in all that it's all relative, or that one belief is just as helpful as another. As I said, bad theology leads to atrocity. We have lots of historical evidence of that, and frequently on a very grand scale. We can't ignore that. The debates need to be engaged for us to pray with any kind of sincerity, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. If we don't believe we can get there, we've got no business. We can just shut up during that part of the prayer and not say that line. We will never take even the tiniest step toward bringing the vision of God's justice and peace to this world if we don't step up to share our own bedrock beliefs with each other and explain why those beliefs are so important to us and how it helps to make both us and the world a better place. And in that sharing, we can learn from one another. But none of that is possible if we never step back and realize that since the beginning, there have been competing belief systems within Christianity itself, and learn to identify what we ourselves think about those things, just to make them conscious. You know, we sing, especially during Holy Week, we sing totally opposite theologies in our hymns. It's especially I did a series once on Good Friday hymns, and the theology is all over the map. And we just get up and sing them all. So I want to make some of that conscious. While I was away, I was happy to hear Sal asking those who came that Sunday about their own core beliefs. And that's the kind of work that I'm going to be encouraging across the next month or so as we look at the origins of those ideas, the pushback they receive, and to explore how believing a particular thing might affect our behavior. To begin all that, I want to zoom out even further to look at how we can approach sharing very different ideas and beliefs about big, important things, beliefs that in many ways define us, without the divisiveness that has become the hallmark of our age. So come with me to a cabin in Kejimkujik National Park in Nova Scotia, where I wrote the first draft of my first book, Blowing the Lid Off the God Box, in the summer of 2001. When I sat down to write the first words of the introduction, I was planning to make the argument that everybody makes, that you can't put God in a box. At 42 years old, I was coming to a point in my life when I was realizing how much damage I had done, both to others and to myself, through my insistence that God only had one path for people in the world and only one way for Christians to direct people to it. As a teen and young adult, I had boxed God up and thought I had it all figured out. Do it this way and you will live, do it this way and you die, end of story. So as I sat down to write the book that was largely going to be my confession of those errors, I was equally confident that putting God in a box was wrong. You can't put God in a box, I wrote, or I typed. And there's a lot of truth in that. The word God, by definition, is above and beyond our full knowing. Gods can do things that ordinary humans can't. That's part of what the word means. To believe in a God, any God, is to express a belief that there is some kind of power beyond just us. A power that we can in some ways observe, but not really predict. A power whose effect we can describe, but whose methods and purposes are to greater and lesser extents, depending on the religion, largely obscured. When the Bible tells us in Proverbs 9:10 that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, it's tapping into the truth that the sooner we realize that we humans are not the be-all and end-all of the universe, the more we are likely to act with wisdom. I know this comes as a shock, but we do not know it all as human beings, nor can we. We can know a lot, and we can learn more, which is part of the excitement of learning and study. But when it comes right down to it, we don't even really know ourselves. Since Plato and Aristotle, they've been like, what is consciousness? I don't know, and we're still pretty much right there. Before we even get to questions about God's nature, the knowledge that God as a concept exists grants us, I believe, the gift of humility. God is God and we are not, which puts us in our place. That right there is the beginning of wisdom because it's the beginning of humility. After the initial blow to our ego of recognizing that there is a power of some kind that's greater than us, that there are things beyond our knowing, all kinds of wonderful things open up. We become free to be wrong without that being a threat to our self-esteem. Once we're free to be wrong, we're free to be curious about, well, gee, if I didn't know that, what else might I not know? Because we're no longer afraid of coming to a wrong conclusion. It's just one more step on the path to learning. Humility gives us permission to fail, which provides the freedom to fully live our lives and counterintuitively then to succeed, to learn, and to grow. If you're too afraid to fail, you will never, ever, ever succeed. But back to the box. As I was in the cabin in Nova Scotia, Writing out my thorough explanation of how God is way too vast and unknowable to go in a box, I hit a snag. While stuffing God in a box for all those years had made many of my relationships difficult and placed unnecessary limitations on me, my conservative upbringing had given me great gifts as well. For one thing, I knew the Bible, like really well. In fact, it was knowing the Bible so well that ultimately led me out of the trap of taking it all literally. Because, man, I was trying, and you can't. But that's another story and another book. But in addition to the gift of the Bible, having God in a tightly contained box allowed me to meet, to know, and to come to love God, especially the God revealed in Jesus. In that box, I could meet God in manageable and understandable bits from the time I was very, very tiny all the way up through adulthood. It was in preaching about my loving relationship with Jesus in my home church when I was 14 years old that I felt my call to ministry. The box was a gift that had made all of that possible. And as I thought about that, then my Bible kicked in, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. John had written in the prologue to his gospel. Wait, isn't God in the flesh another way of saying God in a box? Was my grand pronouncement that you couldn't put God in a box about to blow up the most effective way that most Christians have of learning about God enough to actually turn that knowledge into loving relationship? What if God is so qualitatively different than human beings that we need a box to have anything even remotely like a relationship? Was I ready to adopt God as the Force in Star Wars? A power that existed and could in some ways be harnessed, but was otherwise unknowable and inaccessible? Wasn't the whole point of Jesus to make God known in a way that even the youngest child could understand, as I had? I sat there in my cabin staring at the wall for quite a bit of time. Not only would saying God can't be put in a box dramatically change the Christian concept of who Jesus was, it would eliminate what I think is the greatest contribution of many of the world's religions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The idea that while the intricacies and nature and ways of God are beyond our knowing, the grand and glorious power beyond us is a loving presence that is eager in some way, to some degree, to be known. You can't love by yourself. God can't be love and have no one to love. And God, defined as a loving presence, is the impetus for justice and peace in the world. If that force beyond us is just cutthroat, get to the top to do anything you can, then life looks very different. My Bible again kicked in. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is knowable. That God walks with Adam and Eve in the garden, is friends with Abraham, and has a famous back and forth bartering session. And in the passage from Exodus that Neil read today, we see Moses comfortable enough with God to say essentially, look, God, I've really stuck my neck out for you now for almost 40 years, and you know everything there is to know about me. How about sharing, more of yourself? Will you actually let me see your full glory? God grants Moses' request only in part. You cannot see my face, says God, for no one shall see me and live. And the Lord continued, quote, see, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock. And while my glory passes by, I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I've passed by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. I think the message of that story is that the human body can't really endure the fullness of God's presence. To show Moses even a tiny piece of God's direct presence, God had to stick him in a hole in the rock and cover him up until the last possible minute where Moses could get a tiny glimpse of God's back. But that's only part of the message. While even Moses couldn't bear up in the unbounded and unrestrained presence of God, God would share a limited view, because God does want to be known to the extent that it's possible. And to do that requires for human beings that God be contained in some way, like, for example, in a box. And there in Kejimkujik National Park, I realized that the thing that had caused me problems in my early adulthood was not the box at all. The box had been absolutely necessary for the many positive aspects of my life to that point, including my call to ministry. The problem was not the box, it was the lid. The problem was that I had closed off my understanding of God and had locked my humility in there with it. I had lost my freedom to grow and to learn and to change. Any wisdom I had gained while I was actively gathering knowledge of God in my box, and I was going to Baptist churches and Pentecostal churches and Catholic churches and everything, that was all now stagnating under a sealed lid. And once I recognized that, other things began to come into better focus. I was serving the church in Dover, New Hampshire at the time, and was constantly frustrated by people in the congregation who were always telling me what they didn't believe. I don't believe in the virgin birth. I don't believe in the Trinity. The lists were long and varied, from I don't believe anything should be put on the walls of the sanctuary to I don't believe the resurrection really happened. And my frustration about that puzzled me, since I'd always loved and still love a good theological debate. In every church I had served, including at St. John's, I actively solicited and enjoyed preaching from people's questions. Why was it different when people were saying, I don't believe in the virgin birth or whatever? Once I had the box lid thing figured out, I understood. And I decided to do a series on the Apostles' Creed. And I started that off by naming my frustration with the I don't believe this or that proclamations, and told them, as I say also to you, I actually don't care what you don't believe. I don't. What you don't believe is not interesting to me. Nor does it give me any way to help you as your pastor in any aspect of your life. What interests me very much is what you actually do believe. Each and every one of us can benefit from a box that has positive content in it. I don't care if it's Orthodox Christian content, if it's a hodgepodge of 10 religions, or if it doesn't even mention religion at all. Even if you don't believe in God, you can still come up with positive content for the box, which I said to Unitarians every time I went in my role at the Bible Society. If not God, then what? Give me some positive content there. Each religion has specific things they mean when they use the word God, and Christianity is no exception. But God is a generic term that refers to something that's ultimate. So what's ultimate for you? What's the purpose of life? What value or virtue is above all others for you? Why? What helps you get up in the morning? What stirs your soul? Clearly, the belief across a large swath of this country is that human beings and our wants and desires are the ultimate thing. Many who profess faith act as though God exists to serve us. The planet exists to serve us. Human supremacy is where it's at. And if that's what you believe, put it in your box and we will talk about it. If you're evaluating a particular aspect of Christianity, do not clutter your box with, I don't believe Mary was a virgin. Do you believe there was a person named Mary who gave birth to Jesus? If so, what are the things you believe about her? What are questions you'd like to explore? If you don't believe there was any such person as Mary, then just take all the questions and issues related to Mary out of your box, put them aside. As long as you don't seal the lid shut, you'll have time to revisit it later, because it's likely to come up every Christmas. It's not the box or even the particular content of your box that does harm. It's shutting the lid and telling everyone who has different content than yours that they are wrong and must conform or else. But with the lids off, and only the things we actually do believe in the box, we are in a position to share our beliefs, ideas, and practices with each other with more curiosity and less defensiveness. Oh, really? That's in your box? Well, tell me, what does that do for you? How does that help you? How'd you come to that? And sharing those kinds of things. As I look back across my younger years, I noticed that I never had real debates with people about God or the Bible or religious matters. Arguments, yes, but a real, actual debate where we're both sharing things and both listening, no. And I thought that that was because my ideas were unassailable. But it turned out not to be the case. It was because it's neither fun nor enlightening to debate with a person who doesn't believe that there's any possibility that they could be wrong. That's just an argument. A Monty Python skit comes to mind. The lid on my box was closed. The problem is not the box. The problem is the lid. So over the next month or so, as we visit with some of my favorite heretics and some of the thorniest questions about the nature of God and human beings, I invite you to come with an open box. You can keep the lid on the seat next to you if it makes you feel more secure. You can always slam it down if a cherished idea looks like it's ready to escape, or if something creepy crawly is trying to get in it. You can just close it off then and go home and then peek in later. As I already do each Sunday, I will share with you what's in my box on any given issue, but that doesn't mean you have to make your box look like my box. It's in the give and take, it's in the diversity of ideas and experiences that we find wisdom. When Blowing the Lid Off the God Box first came out, I did a lot of book signings and author talks. Those would go in different directions depending on the group in front of me, but I began all of them the same way, and that's the way I want to close out the sermon this morning. Because nothing makes the point quite so well as this poetic rendering of an old Indian folktale about 6 blind men and an elephant by the 19th century American poet John Godfrey Saxe. I think I've quoted it before. You'll probably hear it until the day I die or can't read it anymore. It was 6 men of Indostan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, "God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall." The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, "Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp. To me 'tis mighty clear this wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out his eager hand and felt about the knee. "What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain," quoth he. "'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree." The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, "E'en the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can, this marvel of an elephant is very like a fan. The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, I see, quoth he, the elephant is very like a rope. And so these men of Indostan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion, exceeding stiff and strong. Though each was partly in the right, all were in the wrong. And then the moral, which I love. So oft in theologic wars, the disputants, I ween, tread on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about an elephant not one of them has seen. So we will prate about a lot of elephants and acknowledge we haven't seen them as we move on through these next weeks, and I invite you to join us. Our hymn is in the red hymnal, number 114, Many Gifts, One Spirit.